What's up, guys? Hope everyone's having a good day. So, for my third video on this channel, what I want to do is more of a story time. So, I figured might as well start with a banger and talk about when I was 19 years old, how I almost died in a motorcycle accident. And I don't know if motorcycle is actually the right word for this. It's more of a moped. I'll try to put a picture up on the screen. I don't know if my editing skills are that good, but hopefully they are. So, I grew up in New York City, born and raised. So there was this, it hit the streets like crack. There was this moped service. It was like rentable mopeds. They were called revels. And it was honestly sick. Like you just scan on your phone, all of a sudden you're on a moped and you can get from place to place so quickly. It was cheap, really fun. And yeah, so my 19-year-old dumbass self was in love with these things, and I remember it was so easy to sign up to make an account, to the point where, as I said, I grew up in New York City, right? So this might seem crazy to most Americans, but in New York City you don't really need a driver's license. So when I was 19 years old, I still didn't even have my driver's license yet. So all I had was a fake ID that I was using to like go to bars, and that actually worked when I scanned it on the app. So I didn't even know how to drive, and I'm whipping this moped in traffic like I'm a professional, right? So you could see where this is going. So yeah, the summer, it was the summer. I remember I was going to work. I remember I took this girl on a date. I met this girl off like one of the apps. I think it was Hinge, and she thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I was like, yeah, like just let's just go around the city on the revel. And I remember like even on that date, because keep in mind I don't know how to drive, so like there was a couple close calls on that date. I mean, I just played it cool. Like she didn't even notice. Keep in mind, like you're supposed to be wearing a helmet on this thing. It was supposedly a rule, and they ended up adding like a feature after where you have to take a picture of yourself with the helmet. But again, 19 years old, I'm not wearing a fucking helmet, especially on a date with a girl. Like that was just in my eyes like the nerdiest thing that you could do. So yeah, there was definitely a couple close calls, but I loved this thing. I wasn't taking the subway, bus, bike, and I was not even walking. If I could take a revel, I would take a revel. So one day I remember I got out of work and I met up with one of my friends. And the way New York is set up, most of you probably know this, there's a huge park in the middle of Manhattan. So I live up on the east side of Manhattan, and I needed to get to the west side with one of my buddies to pick up something. And you can use your imagination what it was. It was weed. And I actually don't smoke weed anymore, but 19 years old, I was smoking like a chimney, but that's unrelated. So I'm like, all right, let's revel there, of course. This is like I'm like the revel marketing CEO at this point. I've put all my friends onto it. And so my buddy hops on the back. We start going. And my first video on this channel, this is kind of a funny tie back, is about focus and how I used to really struggle with focus. So we're cruising down Madison Avenue, so we're going uptown, and I remember just zoning out. And I have done this, now I have my driver's license, and so when I was in college driving, I remember this happened once or twice, and it was like super scary. But like I'll just get lost in my thoughts, and this is something I've gotten a lot better at now. But I remember just completely zoning out, and I was thinking about this date that I had with this girl. I remember just like, oh, like, is she gonna text me back? Or like, I wonder if she had fun. And then all of a sudden, my friend's like, yo, yo, yo. I look up, I'm just rolling right through a red. I turn my head to the left, car coming flying at me. And I just get T-boned with my friend on the back. Boom, we go flying, skidded down. It was like a downhill street. We skidded a full city block, which is a long way to skid. And neither of us had helmets on, so it's honestly a blessing that we even survived. So I remember the first thing, I got up, I was in pain for sure, and my buddy was holding on to my back the entire time. So we stayed on the bike, which is good because none of us had serious injuries. And it was such a shock. Like adrenaline was so high that we just looked at each other. We saw that we were both okay, and we were like pretty much like ecstatic. Like we just like dapped each other up, like, oh my God, like we're alive. Like it was just such a relief to be alive because it really felt like we got lucky. So then my next reaction was a terrible 19-year-old undeveloped brain reaction, and it was to flee the scene, right? So I tried to just get right back on the bike. At this point, the doorman, there's a bunch of people on the street. This was a big crash, like a loud crash, so there's a bunch of witnesses. And my dumbass wanted to get back on the bike and just like get out of there. And thank God the bike was totaled and it didn't work. I seriously think that the reason I say thank God is because in any, not just in New York, but anywhere, if you get into an accident and you try to flee the scene, you're a felon at that point. So I wasn't thinking about that. I just wanted to get out of there, and I'm glad that the bike didn't work. So I remember I turned around, I looked at the car that hit us, right? And the front was totally mangled, and I was like, oh my God, like this is bad. Keep in mind, I don't have a driver's license. So that's the first thing that the guy asked for. He's like, I was like, I'm sorry, I know, I just admitted, like it was totally my fault. And my theory is that this guy was on his phone because he didn't slow down or anything. And it was his light, so that doesn't really matter. But he kind of had almost a sense of like, not guilt, but he felt bad. So that's why I think he might have been on his phone. But that doesn't really matter. It was my fault, 100%. Zoned out. His car was wrecked too. So I remember he's asking for my ID, my driver's license, and I was like, oh my God, here we go. And I just took out my fake, and like I remember my hand was shaking so much. And keep in mind, like to this day, I still have this scar on my back and on my leg. So I'm like, adrenaline is so high that I don't even realize like that I'm bleeding, and there's like an imprint of a road on my back. And so at this point, I'm like, I'm cooked. Like I don't even know what to do here. But I gave him my fake license, and he texted me. I remember a couple hours later. My whole thing was like, what do I do with this bike, right? So this bike is mangled and it doesn't work. So I just called the company, and I got the vibe that this has been happening a lot because they were like, okay, just leave it there. Like we'll file a claim. So I'm like, I'm going to jail. I'm thinking worst case scenario. I remember I went back to my buddies. We had a couple beers just to like calm down from this experience. And then the guy texted me because we had swapped information. And again, this is why I really think God came down and helped me out here, because this guy just thankfully was like a super religious dude, and he was just happy that we were okay. He's like, thank God. He sent like a prayer. It's like, thank God everyone's okay. Please wear a helmet next time. So I knew that he wasn't going to pursue this criminally. Or I didn't know that, but that is what ended up happening. So that was a huge relief. But I always thought I was going to get contacted from this company or someone, because you have to pay for things like this when this happens. I didn't have insurance, I didn't have a license. But it turns out a few months later the company actually has to withdraw out of New York over safety concerns. So people that weren't as lucky as me ended up dying, which is really terrible. It's like super sad. I remember this news reporter died, and a bunch of people died, and that was really a a eye opener for me at the time. I remember just being so grateful that I was alive and lucky, and it really changed my perspective on things. And I ended up having a way closer brush with death a couple years later that really changed my perspective.